All systems go. Right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Strategy Performance Scrutiny Board, Wednesday the 5th of August. So we'll get straight to this. Substitutes, nominations for this meeting and apologies for absence.
Councillor Sweeney has sent his apologies and Councillor Barnes is substituting for him, Chair.
Right.
Good evening, Councillor Barnes.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Members' interest. Do members have any disclosable pecuniary or any other interest which will prevent them from participating in any discussion on the items or participating in any vote? Okay, that's a no. Admission to the public. We have no exempt items on tonight's agenda. Okay. Minutes of the Strategy Performance Scrutiny Board meeting held on the 1st of July 2020. Okay, do we have someone to agree then and someone to second?
Happy to propose, Chair.
Propose. Councillor Mayne, second.
Second.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. The two items on this evening is the annual corporate performance report and the HR working practices during post-COVID-19. I think what's happening at the moment is because I think Jez, who's leading up on the annual corporate performance report, is struggling to get in at this moment in time. What we'll do is we'll switch those two around and we'll go with item 6 first, which is Jackie's HR working practice during the COVID-19. Jackie, it's over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Bellinger. Good evening, members and officers. So you've asked me to come and report in on the various issues that you've raised as part of your last meeting. And just to run through those, what they were, there was how far working practices have changed during lockdown, consider staff experiences, including learning, impacts, benefits, e.g. work-life balance, mental well-being, working hours, communications, environmental impacts, inclusivity and opportunities for the future. And then any issues related to technology, well-being, staff resource, etc. And productivity and collaborative working both internally and externally with our partners. So you should have before you my report that I've produced, really to pick up on some of the key points. If it's okay with you, Chair, I'll just run through a few of the sort of salient points that I want to bring out tonight, if you'd like me to do that. You're on mute, Councillor Bellinger.
Apologies, there we are, back on. I've not had the report through. Laura, have you sent it through recently to us all or not?
I sent it last week, I think.
Did you?
Yes.
Apologies. Has anybody had a chance to have a look at the report?
Yeah, I've read it.
Right, okay, brilliant. Is there any way we can actually get the report up on screen? Are you able to screen? Is that able to be done or not?
Do you want me to forward it to you now, Paul?
If you could, yeah. And
yeah, I'll forward it to you on email.
Right, and then I've got it directly in front of me then, yeah.
It's about 23 pages, Paul, so I think it will be difficult to bring it up on screen.
Right, okay, not a problem. Sorry,
the
Jackie.
actual report,
I'll let you
report okay, the report itself is 6 pages and then there's appendices attached to that, Councillor Bellinger. So, okay, so if I just run through then, obviously I won't go into the depth that's in the report, but during lockdown period, obviously we've got a number of staff, 1,300 staff that are currently working from home. And it's fair to say that within a couple of days, we mobilised that with fantastic support from IT in terms of getting staff up and running, working from home, using their own devices in some cases, but by and large, IT have helped us to support that as well. And tonight we've got Craig Chumildin here, who is our corporate lead for digital transformation, who has also attached a report that Craig's done on the IT side of things, because I think that's really important to cover that as well. So just moving on, in terms of, I think it's fair to say that staff anticipated that this would be short term, and obviously as time's progressed and the impact of the virus has taken its toll, we now realise that it's going to be certainly medium to long term. And our Chief Executive, Robin Tuddenham, has actually issued a directive to say that staff that are currently working from home will continue to at least the end of the year, and then we'll review it. And that gives staff some certainty really with regard to the working conditions, making sure that we mobilise staff with longer term solutions, equipment, reasonable adjustments in terms of DSE, the assessments that we've done, etc. So just moving on in terms of the report itself. Obviously, from our perspective, it's imperative that the health and well-being of our staff is first and foremost considered in that. And what we said was that where staff are able to work from home, they should do so, they must do so. Obviously, not all our frontline services staff can do that. And where they were unable to do that, we quickly mobilised risk assessments, individual health questionnaires. Some staff were shielding, as you know, because of the NHS letters that were issued to them. And we took an extra precautionary measure of shielding other staff. For example, staff that we know that we've got an occupational health record for may have not received a letter. And there is some acceptance that, not everybody will have received one. The NHS did a brilliant job in terms of writing out to our staff. But where we had intelligence, we also asked those staff to shield. And in addition to that, our pregnant employees, that we wanted to make sure that they were protected, because there have been some cases, particularly around other organisations where that had not, there've been issues with that, shall we say. So where they could carry out the job, we asked them to do so. Where they couldn't, we asked it to continue, but obviously we put a number of provisions in place with regard to risk assessing that work. It's fair to say that the council for many years have been anticipating, shall we say, or planning, had it on our risk assessment for a pandemic, but I don't think any of us realised the impact that this would have on any of us really, but particularly on our staffing. And I think they've done the tenacity and the continuity of service has been exemplary. I think we've had a few hiccups, but nevertheless, we've got over those and hopefully move those along. I've consulted regularly with the trade unions with regard to what we've been doing. On a weekly basis, I have a call in with them, sometimes more regular. So moving on to what we've done and in terms of answering the questions that you've asked me to look at. So as you're aware, we have considerably changed the working practices of our staff during lockdown. We've got some increased learning, I think, and the impact of some of the benefits. It's fair to say that there's been quite a number of opportunities that we'd like to continue with going forward, particularly around the environment, travelling arrangements, working hours. I'd like to say work-life balance, but I think that's been stretched in some respects because of the additional onerous work that's the pandemic's put on all of us, really. Technology, I mean, I've already mentioned, the mobilisation of people, use of technology like we are this evening, continuing with meetings. I think we're one of the first council to have some of the democratic meetings that we've held, being able to do that, and the collaboration with our external partners. In terms of communicating with staff, we've upped to daily e-call messages, which members will be aware of. Regular and timely communication has gone out, particularly around health and well-being, but also as well to keep everybody updated with anything that's happening on a daily and a weekly basis. So as in every crisis, there's valuable opportunities and learning, and hopefully we'll capture that as we go along. And I've attached to the report an appendices that we've been looking at from a corporate leadership perspective with regard to the RSA grid approach, which you'll find on page appendices 1, and I think some of that you'll be aware of through the various briefings that have taken place. So that's the first part really. In terms of lockdown and the vulnerable staff that I've mentioned previously, with the protection I've covered, so I won't go into that further. In terms of I think productivity was one of the things that members wanted me to look at and report back on, and certainly on attendance. As I've already said, some staff have reported back in terms of a better work-life balance because they are able to balance priorities that they were really, sort of struggling with in the beginning, it's fair to say, particularly when our schools were closed. and the children were being home educated. So some of the things that we looked at was relaxing our HR policies to ensure that, you know, staff could have that flexibility of working and hopefully continue to deliver the, you know, productive job that they were doing. That was most welcomed. It's had an impact on attendance, and certainly I've had no reports of productivity reducing, in fact the opposite in many cases. So I have not included in the report, other than Q1, the impact on sickness, but just to give you a bit of a flavour really, the first month, March, percentage of sickness absence overall, not related just to COVID, was up by 13%. April, it reduced quite significantly actually, down by 25%. May was 45%, and June was 28%. So, you know, in terms of attendance, you know, just by sheer fact of how we were working has had a huge impact on attendance. And I think members, scrutiny members in the past have actually raised this as a bit of an issue about the fact that staff coming to work, spreading the viruses, coughs, colds, the general viruses, and being able to continue to work from home, not having the commute to work, has had a massive impact on well-being. So these are things that staff don't want to lose going forward in the future. And then not to just paint a rosy picture, because not all staff have coped extremely well with working from home, with the additional burden that the pandemic has had from people's mental well-being. So we've put massive support in there for staff to try and ensure that they felt supported, regular communication, regular one-to-ones, increased contact by managers, ringing in to check on people, particularly that are vulnerable, working from home, perhaps living alone as well, you know, not to, you know, come away from the fact that this has been quite challenging for some staff. And then the position of some staff that are working in precarious positions, trying to do the best for both the workplace and the family. So, you know, we accept that it's not everybody's cup of tea in terms of how we're working at the moment, but we've tried to put some additional support in there for those staff that are struggling with that. And trying to maintain a work-life balance when you've got a 24/7 office at home is sometimes has been quite challenging really in the beginning, particularly when staff thought it was a temporary arrangement. In terms of other support that we've given, we introduced a number of mechanisms to support staff in terms of self-referral to occupational health, so that they didn't have to go through managers, so that they could have a confidential consultation with our nurse-led occupational health practice. And that was taken up quite well in the beginning by staff. We've introduced an employee reference group to ensure that we consult with representatives across the workforce, which has resulted in some changes and some additional support being put in, so that we consider that as well. And I think members, you've raised it in the past in this.
I've lost you, Jackie. Jackie, I don't know if you can hear us. I don't know if you can hear us, Jackie, but we've seemed to have lost a bit of connection with you. We've lost. Right. Jackie, I don't know if you can hear me, but we've lost a bit of connection with you. We can see you, but we can't. The audio is really poor.
In the absence of Jackie's availability, then, is there any of the IT technology questions that you may wish to field that I can answer at this moment?
Yeah, open to members. Councillor Lynn.
Yes, thank you very much. One of the cases that I dealt with a week or two ago was of somebody who managed to get rehoused and who needed to communicate with our benefits section about the fact that she needed to claim housing benefit from a different address. And she's probably fairly typical of quite a lot of people in my ward, which is Park Ward, who don't use the internet, who isn't that confident about her English. And I ended up having a very interesting socially distanced talk with her where I sat there with my counselor iPad at 2 meters distance as the kids raced up and down the street, and we were drowned out by the ice cream van and everything, actually inputting and doing an online thing for her because she couldn't do it online, and it was really important that she start being able to pay her rent. I just wondered if you'd like to say a little bit about the move to the move to online, and the impact and what mitigation is going on. This isn't so much about employees, but it's more about the service to our residents. I wonder if you'd like to say what allowances are being made for that, because that woman won't be the only woman in those circumstances. And we managed to have a creative solution to it, but even now, I can't do that for everybody really. So I just wondered if you'd like to comment on that. Thank you.
Right.
So thanks for that question. So as part of any kind of service design work that we work with any of the services with, we're always aware that, we're saying digital by default, but we are aware that there are certain parts of communities that, digital is not an option. That might be through financial inequality, physical, mental well-being, general connectivity in rural areas. So as part of service design, we will always look at what the alternative options are. And as part of a sort of longer term digital strategy, a very key theme that we do have is around digital exclusion. And what we're doing is actually we're currently just working with all a range of different services across the council to see and get the evidence of what this exclusion kind of looks like, so we can start building and looking at what solutions there needs to be it around digital skills, where there's digital skills issues. We're looking to work with local partners on that, both in the voluntary sector, and we're having fruitful discussions with Lloyds Banking to see what kind of resources we can use from other partners. So looking at sort of digital skills, that's a key one. That's one thing we want to do, and Leeds Council are certainly an area that are excelling in that. So we're looking towards perhaps their 100% digital leads at the schemes they're doing. But I think the core theme is when we're looking at services, so as part of the restart programs, part of what we want to amplify, we will certainly be looking and working with services to look at digital by default, but making sure that we have different channels available that will allow people that have non-digital connectivity to still interact with council services.
Yes, if I could just come in there, Chair, because obviously, were we not in lockdown, were our, did we have an office to which she could have gone and asked for help in filling in the form or something, then she could have done that. But of course she can't. Do you know what I mean? So that's, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate that there are changes in line, that there's a real push to channel shift. But I just want to say that in some of the in wards like mine, I really want people to think, and I'd like to be consulted about what you're planning in terms of some of that channel shift, because I've certainly had experience during lockdown. I mean, I've managed to do it as a ward councillor, and I don't begrudge doing it. But there's also a lot of people that probably don't reach me, and who and for whom this insistence on it all being digital is actually causing hardship. Okay.
Yeah. So as an example, what we could say around working with highways on highways improvements is we're looking at how highways issues get reported, and as part of that, we're looking at the multiple channels. So there is an online digital self-serve, but there will always be a contact to be able to physically ring the actual council to actually go through that. So just to try and reassure you that we will always make sure that the digital divide we know is there, and we will also cater in a non-digital way for those that can't connect.
Jackie, what we've done is we've just taken advantage a little bit at the moment when you went off with the IT issues to sort of like pick Craig's brains on some of the IT issues. So I've got a few questions for Craig, and then we'll come back to you, Jackie, if that's okay.
Fine. Yep, that's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So we've got Mike, then George, then Rob.
Thank you, Chair. I think actually Jackie has experienced the issue there. We might have the best IT in the world, but if your internet service is not up there to scratch, then this way of working is not going to work. What are we doing for those individuals who don't have the necessary bandwidth to support these sort of meetings, Zoom calls? And are we, for example, if there is other alternatives, but those individuals can't afford to pay the increased cost of a cable line that's coming in. We're looking to support those and cover the difference. For example, my company have said anybody who has had to change their internet provider to work from home, they will compensate the difference between what it was prior to COVID to during COVID.
Thanks, Councillor Barnes. So as part of working with kind of the Safer Workplaces group in the council, where every member of staff that's completing their DSEs, their kind of home assessments and identifying the challenges that are getting, we are getting people that are in, for an example, in the rural areas where there is some real known sort of dead spots, connectivity issues. We have discussed with our IT colleagues around actually if the fixed broadband, if you like, if that is not adequate, what are the mobile connections like? So what are the opportunities around the mobile 4G hubs, etc. And there are some stiff discussions that if there are real connectivity issues, then does that invoke whether we need to have people actually working in an office? That's an open discussion that's been having with Safer Workplaces group, because the best will in the world where we have actually zero connectivity, they may not even be able to upgrade. We've got to have them kind of challenges. So all these discussions are ongoing to try and understand what the challenges are, and we work through kind of available options. I'd probably have to refer back to Jackie in terms of discussions or any kind of recompense around technology kind of upgrades for staff. Sorry to put you on the spot there, Jackie.
You want me to come in there? No, that's fine.
You
Sorry, Councillor Bellinger.
Yeah, of course you can, Jackie. Yeah, by all means, please.
Fine, thank you. Yeah, so we've had a couple of staff that have asked for additional support, and we've provided the dongles that IT have, which gives that boost to the IT connectivity. It's fair to say that the majority of staff have coped extremely well. We've had little representation, but we do have a policy on this, and we will look at it, particularly where they've not connected and they need to be connected to work from home. The majority of our staff appear to be. I think it's fair to say that the number of staff that were working from home, not just in the council, but when we went into lockdown, I really have no idea how the servers coped with it all, but we managed to get through it with relatively few problems. I think things have happened since, but we're picking up on that. And as Craig says, what we've looked at as the Safer Workforce group is to sort of look at where there are issues and see how we can resolve those issues, either internally or through external support.
Thank you.
George and Rob, do you want to come in with your question? Is it to Craig?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, sorry, Craig, but mine's for Jackie, if I may.
Shall we? If your question's for Jackie, Rob, is yours for Jackie or for Craig?
I actually have two questions, one for Jackie and one for Craig.
I'll tell you what we'll do then. Jackie, do you want to finish off your presentation then, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure.
And then what we'll do then is we'll come back to you at the end then with questions for you and Craig, yeah?
Okay, I'm not quite sure where we got up to and what you heard, but I think really just in terms of finishing off about the wellbeing and support for staff. So a few other things that are in my report that are covered. I won't go into too much detail, but we did provide quite a lot of support around mental health, because obviously the pandemic itself created mental health issues for people at home, but also because of trying to balance the workforce priorities that they had as well. I've covered everything in terms of the consultation that we've done, so I won't go into that. We did furlough quite a number of staff, and a number of staff are still furloughed, particularly those areas where the buildings were closed, the libraries, the sports centres, theatre, etc., which is quite a massive consultation exercise to go through with staff to individually get them to sign up and agree to that. We've just over 300 now still furloughed. We're starting to bring staff back where we've opened facilities, but obviously we've got to be mindful of the current spike and what's happening there before we start to think about increasing that at this stage. So quite a number of staff. We've obviously, as part of the government guidance, we had to prove that we would look to redeploy these staff to react to the pandemic and give bolstering support to the various hubs that we set up. the volunteering hub to support our residents, the HR hub to support staff, IT hub, obviously, and we've already talked about that. And, you know, we did run out of additional work, so we looked to furlough staff where that was the case. And we can unfurlough those staff with a day's notice, and we will do that if we need to, for example, react to the track and trace response that Deb's talked about in the all-member briefing earlier, and I won't go into that because obviously that was the members. So volunteering hub, as you know, incredible support for our residents, and a number of our staff went in to support that, doing dual roles, making sure that that was stacked up in terms of not just the frontline bit, but the back office, like to make sure that residents were communicated with and that we reacted where we needed to. Productivity and collaboration in terms of internally and externally, I think certainly in my 36 years of service for the council, I have never seen the council staff come together so positively to react to this and to just forget the individual agendas, but to deliver what we needed to deliver to make sure that the services continued and our residents were supported. So I think that's been fantastic. And also the various meetings that we've held, silver, gold, the business continuity, where we've got partners on the line coming together, has definitely cemented some fantastic working relationships for the future. And it can only benefit the residents of Calderdale as a place. So in terms of, I'll move on to climate change. There are obvious, you know, examples of where we've improved the climate, and that obviously that's one of the council's priorities. And some of those we'll want to retain going forward, doing this type of meeting in the future, avoiding travel costs, train costs, you know, the carbon footprint. You know, some of the things that we've mobilised within days would have taken us a heck of a lot longer under normal circumstances. So I have to say that some real positives have come out of this crisis, and we've got to really bottle those going forward. And, you know, in terms of face-to-face meetings and saving resource, time, travel has got to be certainly an opportunity for the future. So just in conclusion, if I may, Chair, a significant amount of work has taken place to ensure that services are maintained and where appropriate, you know, in terms of remodelling to deal with a pandemic. And our staff and wellbeing initiatives that have been significantly magnified, shall we say, especially around mental wellbeing support, is definitely something that we need to capture and continue for the future. So I'll pause there, and then you hopefully, if you've got any questions, then I can answer those for you.
Thank you, Jackie. Appreciate that. I've finally got the report through, and it looks quite an impressive report. I'll enjoy reading that over the next couple of days. And I think if I've any questions from that, I'll actually come back to you as well. So I can only apologise for not actually being able to read it before this meeting today. Councillor Scullion, have you got anything? Have got anything you'd like to add before we start going to questions?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say thank you to all the staff in HR and in IT in terms of just turning around the situation so quickly. It was not easy. There were a lot of very difficult decisions to take very quickly. And really, we had two parallel things working at the same time. One was our duty of care to our employees, and the other was our duty of care to the community, health and safety in terms of the virus. And we had to run those two things in parallel. And I think we've done, you know, a very good job so far, and I hope we carry on doing a very good job. And I think some of the comments that Jackie made about how we kept in touch with staff and saw some of the individual needs, and I think there's learning to be got from that in terms of working with our staff as a whole person with children and with other responsibilities and travel and so on. Going forward, I think work will change. I think the other thing to say is about the IT, and I want to thank members as well as our own employees, because we've all had to learn. We have really all had to learn very quickly. I had never used Zoom before the pandemic, or Microsoft Teams, or YPay, or all of the other techniques platforms that we've been using. And we've all knuckled under and managed it really, members as well as staff. So I think there's a tremendous amount of learning to come out of this. We're not finished yet. As we know, we're going through a difficult period in terms of the increase of the rate of transmission. But I think there's lots that we will take from this going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Scullion. Councillor Robinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Greatly appreciated. Yeah, definitely, it's a good report, and it's definitely one for the paperless report bank. It's a really good one. My first question, I've sort of got two questions. Second one's really quick. First one's about agile working. Paragraph 5, it mentions a lot of the post-COVID takeaways, and a lot of those points in paragraph 5 relate to meetings. But I was wondering about actual agile working practices. There's a lot of positives, and I think following COVID, before you sort of needed an excuse to leave the office, you needed an excuse to work from home. But in the future, it's probably going to be a situation where you need an excuse to actually go into the office. But if we are adopting an agile working practice, there are also negatives. The report mentions anxiety, for example. Now, I am a bit cautious on anxiety because there are other lockdown effects, such as not being able to go out, not being able to socialise with your friends. So I am cautious on that point. But there's also other elements such as energy use. So a lot of organisations now procure 100% of their energy from renewable sources. However, for example, my energy consumption at home, I have no idea if that comes from a renewable source. So that it also does have ramifications on that front. And then also cycling. Loads of people are cycling now. How do we actually turn cycling into a commuter habit? So my question really is, looking at paragraph 5 wider, does paragraph 5 also apply to actually agile working practices where we're going to be saying to staff employees, can you work from home, say 3 days a week and work in the office 2 days a week? Is that actually going to become a working practice? And my second question, just regards to furlough, a lot of organisations have made their employees take annual leave as part of furlough. Is this something that the council have done? Thank you.
Would you like me to answer those, Chair?
Please, Jackie.
Okay, so first one, thank you, Councillor Robinson, firstly. The first one about agile working. I think it's a very good question. It's certainly something that we've relaxed. I've mentioned in the report that I had to look at relaxing all the HR policies simply because of staff being in the position that they were, trying to look after dependents, whether that be young children that were out of school because we closed the schools, etc. And making sure that we were as flexible as possible to try and accommodate the working hours around their working life that they could accommodate within their family household. And, it's worked really well. The feedback that I've got from the employee reference group and through the different surveys that we've done has been really appreciated. I've had a number of emails from staff direct, which is pretty rare really, to say, you don't know how much this has helped us. Just the relaxation and it being the norm that we look at agile working, as Councillor Robinson says, that it was the opposite way around, wasn't it, prior to lockdown, etc. So I think to answer your question, yes, we do want to build on the agile working, the flexible working, but obviously not to come away from services being provided at the time that they're required, meeting customer demand, ensuring that we're able to fulfil the requirements of the services that we offer, but being as flexible as we can. It used to be that staff used to wait till they'd got through the probationary period to ask to work from home for a day a week, for example, or a day a fortnight. That shouldn't be the case. It should be the norm, and it should be a big selling point for the council to attract good staff in to work for us. And it has certainly been in some of our services, like legal services, where solicitors have specifically said they've come to work for the council because they get a work-life balance, they get that flexibility, and we need to build on that as certainly a staff development, staff package that we offer. So that's the first one. In terms of cycling, yes, we're working with public health, promoting the fact that we want to encourage more staff. I've also changed the HR policy to accommodate a cycling allowance rather than a car allowance. as part of the climate change policy that I introduced earlier in the year, working with Jez Tweed and colleagues in that department to look at what we can build on here. And we're just rolling out, you may have seen ECOL this week, rolling out the climate change training that we're wanting to ensure that all our staff have, so that we've all got responsibility. It's a clear objective of the council, and it's certainly one that we should be pushing and delivering ourselves, leading by example. So hopefully that might have answered your first question, Councillor Robinson. Right, question 2, furloughing of staff. Yes, as part of when I wrote out to staff, the letter is clear that whilst you are furloughed, you will be expected to take 1/12 of your leave during the year, and that is no different for all staff. Furlough staff should be no different. I have recently done a report to look at whether that's been happening, and where it isn't happening, we will enforce leave, and we will write to staff to tell them they will be taking X period of leave. We have to give them notice of that, but that's what I'm doing this week. And I had a meeting this morning with HR advisors to look at that. So yes, is the answer to your question, Councillor Robinson. It shouldn't be any different to any other staff member. It wouldn't be fair otherwise.
Perfect. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you.
Councillor Holden.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got 2 questions. If I do Jackie's first. I understand we'll have quite a number of members of staff at the moment who are either redeployed because their functions can't be carried out because of COVID rules. I'm thinking leisure centres, theatres, etc. And also there's probably a big question mark over things like theatres and other areas. What are we doing to reassure staff that and support staff that might be thinking their positions are at risk long term? Obviously, we're coming, the furlough scheme nationally is being wound down. You know, it's going to be quite a worrying time for quite a few members of staff at the moment. That's my first question. And the second question for Craig is, as far as VDI is concerned, is there a plan to roll that out or to make it available to members? Because things like access to the intranet, we don't have that at the moment. You know, we're trying to get hold of even something as simple as contact numbers for specific officers. It's really difficult. You know, the only way to do it is to go through the 8000 number, go through the switchboard and get transferred to someone. It can be really difficult for us to find the officers that we need to speak to. The intranet, if we were sat in the office in the town hall, be dead easy. So are there any moves for us to be VDI enabled? And that's it, thanks.
Okay, shall I go first with your first question? Okay, so in terms of the number of...
Sorry. Yeah, go on, Jackie.
Okay.
Sorry, it might be a bit of experience there.
Okay, so the number of staff redeployed at the moment, we have a number that are helping out across the different services to bolster, support, etc. And yeah, they're doing an absolute fantastic job. And prior to furloughing a number of staff, for example, in sport and leisure, theatre, etc., they were also supporting a number of the services. Whilst they are furloughed, just to answer that question, we did a frequently asked questions type approach to this for staff. They are still employed, even though they're furloughed, so they still should be having one-to-one discussions, shared conversations. We've set up a WhatsApp group so that they can ask a question and it can go to everybody so that the same repeat questions are answered quickly as well. We do get quite a regular flow of questions through to the HR Hub inbox, the HR COVID inbox. And again, we share those, not just with the response to the employee, but as an FAQ as well. In addition to that, Gary Burns, obviously for the sports side, Bob C. Robinson for the museum side, have been communicating as well with various mechanisms that they've already got in place throughout. So hopefully those staff that are furloughed will be having regular contact with their management team. Councillor Holden, I hope that answers your question, but if not, do you want to come back on that one?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Jackie. And just if you could pass on thanks to the staff, they are doing a great job.
Can I just jump in there on that, because one of the things I wanted to ask you, Jackie, which is part of the same question and answer, is how are we identifying the areas that are actually needing the support from, you know, some of our staff that are furloughed? I mean, I had a meeting last week with Children and Young People Services through the recommendation 41, and they're struggling for some support with admin at the moment, because obviously a lot of them are having to work from home as well. You know, how are we identifying what areas could do with that little bit of a lift? Okay,
Councillor Bellinger, yeah, that's a good question. We actually put out to all on e-call to all managers as well through CLT, ELT, directorate, leadership teams, etc., to say that if they need additional resource, to email the HR COVID inbox, and that's been working very well. So if they do need support, you know, they know what to do and they know who to contact either through HR COVID inbox or direct to the service. So for example, going direct to Nigel's team with regard to business support requests, etc. But it seems to be working quite well, so I'm surprised that you've had that query that they need support. But I'll put an inquiry in there to see whether or not they've made contact.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Sorry, I think next question was for Craig, weren't it, Rob?
Hi, Councillor Holden, thank you for that. So in terms of VDI, ultimately, it's an assessment of need. So as part of the Office 365 rollout, when we work with members, we'll be assessing that need. And put simply, if VDI is more suitable for your needs, then there is no reason why VDI cannot be enabled. We know we can enable it on iPads. We know VDI can be enabled on desktop machines. But in terms of your concerns around access to information via the intranet, I think the rollout of Microsoft Teams will kind of change that kind of access. So Teams will give you almost availability to chat with anybody that is on Teams, and that's both internal and external to the organisation. And because it's cloud-based, there is that opportunity to actually use Teams on multiple devices. So, you know, there won't actually be that reliance on the intranet for that kind of information. Microsoft Teams, as part of the Microsoft Office 365 rollout, will provide much more flexibility in terms of access to people, be it via audio call, via video call, via chat, or via just to find out their contact details. So the intranet won't be such a pinch point in the future once 365 is rolled out. But in terms of VDI as a mechanism, then as we assess the kind of devices and iPads and laptops as we roll out and work with members, those decisions can be made, and it may be different for each member depending on their needs and their working practice. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. No, good to hear. I mean, and funnily enough, we've been running Office 365 and Teams at Ripon Parish Council since day one, basically, of lockdown, and it works great for us. I'm looking forward to it being rolled out across Calderdale.
Yeah, thank you,
Councillor Lynn.
Sorry, there we are. Yes, just a couple of questions for Jackie, please. The first thing is just to say, I really want to take this chance to pay tribute to all the workers who are not working from home and who are not furloughed and who are out stamping the streets. And there's a lot of them. There's our neighbourhood wardens, there's our enforcement people, there's the environmental health people that I was stomping the streets of Park Ward last week, going around visiting shops and everything to get the message across. There's the people empty the litter bins. There's all sorts of people like that. And I suppose my first question, and I've got two if I may, my first question would be, to what extent HR are really thinking about how those people's lives might have changed. If I think, for example, of people who are part of our neighbourhoods working in Park Ward, who do the most fantastic work and who previously were able to pop in, although they were out virtually all day after day, they were able to pop in for a brew to the neighbourhood centre, between sessions and so on. And of course, they can't do that now because the neighbourhood centre is shut. They're just effectively, they're out and about on their own. So I just wondered to what extent thought was being given to the changes that this has meant for our predominantly our manual staff and our staff that are doing the other sorts of work. That's the first question. The second question is, following the lockdown and the anticipated rollout over the next few days, which we've been advised of by our Director of Public Health, of us picking up on testing and tracing in a local perspective, and the need to actually be able to deploy people who speak particular languages. It might be Czech, it might be Slovak, it might be Bangla, it might be Punjabi, it might be Urdu. I wonder to what extent that's been a feature of the work of HR, really. And I do hark back to the work that Councillor Naeem and I did about introducing diversity in the workplace and seeing language skills as being pretty damn critical, and never more so than now. Thanks.
Okay. Is that okay to answer those, Councillor Bellinger? Yeah?
Yeah, of course it is.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. First question, the impact on manual staff. I think an absolutely imperative question in terms of what support we've given, how we're working with those staff. Yes, they've kept things going, absolutely supporting things like the household waste, refuge collection, etc. Safer, cleaner, greener staff, fantastic support there. And how the impact on those staff initially was extremely, yeah, I have to say it was a huge impact. And what did we do? And what are we still doing, really? We're trying our best to consult with them. I have staff go down to talk to, for example, Safe, Cleaner, Greener only last week with regard to working practices, how they are being supported. Are they getting what they need from us? Are we covering everything they need? I'm conscious that those types of staff are not e-enabled, so we might not be reaching them. And are we getting to them? Are we understanding what they need? Are they represented sufficiently, whether that be at the employee reference group or feeding through? And I've already covered the work that I'm doing with the unions, and it's been absolutely fantastic, I have to say. They are the eyes and ears that have fed through to me about things as well that I may not be aware of. Health and safety have been out looking at risk assessments, working with transport, working with the neighbourhoods in terms of the areas that you've covered already. I work very closely with Derek Bain. I spoke to him only yesterday morning about additional support that he might need going forward to support enforcement, and making sure that we've got the resilience for track and trace in terms of what we might need going forward. And maybe we might need to bring some staff back from furlough quicker than we anticipated, because we need that resource possibly going forward to make sure that we've got that supported. So yes, Councillor Lynn, we are supporting the manual staff. We are appreciative of all the work that they've continued to do, coming into work because they can't do the jobs from home, and ensuring that we do keep that engagement going. We won't stop there. I'll keep going as much as I possibly can, and if there's anything that you want to feed through to me from a member's point of view, please do so, and I will react to it straight away. But we are considering everything that we can do to support those staff. Some of those staff have asked to be redeployed because they're anxious about their home life, that they may have vulnerabilities in the household, and we've done that too. We've looked at shielding those staff and giving them alternative work that takes them away from the areas that perhaps, like the front line, social distancing was a bit of an issue at the beginning, where members of the public were coming up to them in parks and things like that. And we've tried to look at that work. And there's so much more that we can do, and we will do in terms of that. Moving on to your second question, Councillor Lynn, which was about the diversity in the workplace and staff speaking a second language. We hold that information. We have a list of staff that speak a second language that we do call on to go out and support, and particularly around what we're going to need in the next few weeks on the track and trace, and making sure that we've got that language skill. And you may have seen eCall this week. I put one out again today on Wellbeing Wednesday, asking for staff to come forward that speak a second language, or more, multiple languages, if they would make themselves known to HR through the HR COVID inbox. So that plea went out today. It's on the eCall message. And in what we're looking at as well is we held it on the Future Workforce Programme database of those staff that told us that it held a different language or multiple languages. And we're moving that onto iTrent so that staff will be able to update that and input that on a regular basis. So yeah, we've considered that too, Councillor Lynn. I don't know if that answers your questions, but happy to take a follow-up if I've not answered anything you want.
I think it'd be interesting to see how many of those 300 staff can actually speak a second language as well, that may be able to help with translation.
Yeah.
300 furloughed staff. Yeah. Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. One of my questions has primarily been answered, so I won't go into that one. The other one was to do with training. How are we managing and looking at training both new staff, especially if we are in a working from home situation, and B, existing staff with ongoing training requirements? I think conscious that some people learn in different ways, some people need training and teaching in different ways, and whilst some people might online modules, online courses quite easy and nice to run through, some people do require that extra support sometimes, a face-to-face or at least somebody within a room to talk to them. So how are we managing that process?
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. So yes, it's interesting. We've just had a meeting this morning about this with the OD team that I lead as well. So we've converted a number of our courses onto e-learning, and you're absolutely right, it doesn't suit everybody. So we're looking at sort of the virtual, we're looking at the webinar. We've converted, like, for example, we've just converted the recruitment and selection course so that it's an e-learning, but then it's the follow up with like a Teams type approach like we're doing this evening, where regular questions and discussions take place following the e-learning and debating the sort of subjects. But there are a number of training courses that we can't convert. So what we've been looking at as well, and we've put to the future workplace group that consider any function that needs to come back in, whether that be a short term, just for the day or for a number of hours. And we've put forward some of the courses that we can't convert and that we need to do and that will need to be done through social distancing. So for example, first aid is an ideal one, where we're looking at no more than 6 in a learning setting, if you like, and doing those. We're looking at buildings, location, how we can do that, whether we can support it through different mechanisms. So one instructor doing 2 groups of 6, 2 separate meeting rooms, so that we're doing the social distancing, but obviously we're utilising the trainer, paying for the trainer for 1 day as opposed to 2 separate courses at an additional cost to the council. So we're just in the infancy of looking at that, but yes, we are looking at it and we have converted a number. We're doing recruitment through online, webinar, interview process, WhatsApp, Teams, Zoom, and that's worked very well actually so far, but it's not without challenges, because obviously we've had it this evening with IT connections and people being able to get in, etc., and losing connections, but we're doing the best like other organisations with what technologies that we've currently got. In terms of supporting new staff, that has been a challenge, I will say, you know, inducting new staff. We've not recruited the numbers that we were prior to lockdown, but where we have, we've either done it through social distancing and having one-to-ones in the very, you know, in Princess buildings, for example. So we've not completely closed our buildings, as you know, and I covered it in the report. Where it's not possible to do things over, you know, like we're doing this evening, we've had to do some connectivity through meeting and having those meetings in the Princess buildings or the town hall or whatever that might be. Don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you, it does.
Well,
thank you.
Good though, it's in the report.
Sorry, Councillor Gallagher. I heard the voice.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, sorry, we heard the voice. We can't see you, but we could just hear your voice in for a moment. Did you have a question?
Could you hear me?
Did you have a question?
Me? No, I didn't. I did raise a hand, but my questions have already been answered.
All right. Okay.
Chair, I had asked earlier on.
Sorry, Councillor Porritt. Yeah, I thought I'd seen your hand up at one point.
No, I put on the chat that I had a question. I didn't want to see it, so I'm just making sure you've not forgotten me.
No. It's your
Shall
turn.
I go ahead?
Sorry, it's you now, actually, Councillor Porritt.
Excellent stuff. First of all, I'd like to really thank Jackie and Craig, and if they could please as well pass on our thanks to their teams, because what they've managed to achieve in such a short period of time has been quite remarkable, and really sort of getting us all working in the way that we are now, really without, from this end at least, without too many major hiccups, has been an extraordinary piece of work. But yeah, with regard, going back to working from home, we'd asked Craig a little bit earlier on about the IT implications of different people's circumstances from working from home. But I'd like to ask Jackie what we're doing in terms of, obviously everybody's home circumstances are very different. And like you said before, people were expecting this to be a short-term thing. You don't mind short-term sitting at the kitchen table, sitting on the sofa, finding a little corner to work in, but that's not a working environment. And those of us that are lucky enough to have a proper setup and a comfortable chair and a decent desk are in a very comfortable, happy situation. But those people who are potentially in an overcrowded or noisy house, or who don't have a private space to work, or people who've got such different circumstances, I'm just wondering, I'd like to ask really what we're doing in terms of ensuring that people are able to work safely and comfortably in their own homes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Porritt. If I can answer that. Yeah. So what I think Craig's alluded to whilst I was not connected was the display screen equipment, DSE equipment that we've asked staff to complete. One for every home worker. I've completed one. We've looked at those. It comes up, it's a series of questions that the manager has then got to look at. What are the impacts of working at home? Do you have the required equipment that you need? Have you got the space? Do you have a desk? Do you have a suitable room? And those questionnaires are coming back in, and managers are assessing those and saying, okay, I've got, you know, a pile of questionnaires, and 2 out of 10 might be that the workplace isn't satisfactory at home, and we're looking at assigning a space within Princess Buildings for staff that really can't work from home and have difficulties with you know, children at home, or perhaps they just do not have the space. We've got, without breaching any confidentiality, we've had a couple of staff that's partners work nights, for example, so working in the house during the day is not conducive to their health and well-being either. So we've looked at that. The group that we've set up to look at safe workplaces are looking at making sure that staff have got the required equipment that possibly they thought they might not need for 2 weeks, but of course now we're talking up to Christmas, they do need. So we've sent dispersed chairs to home, desks to home, monitors, screens, footrests and things like that. So staff have been able to come into a central point and pick that equipment up so that, you know, they can manage. But the DSE questionnaire gives the manager all the information that they need to assess and ensure that they are able to work safely at home. And if not, what are the alternatives? Obviously, it's our priority to keep as many staff at home because that's where they're safe, you know, and free from exposure to the virus. But obviously, we've got to make sure that they've got the well-being, the wherewithal, should I say, to continue to work from home and the facilities there available.
Thank you, that's very reassuring. Thank you very much.
Just adding to that one, actually, have we had any issues with people's insurance, home insurance, as them having to change from, you know, the working environment to actually turning their home into a working environment, plus the extra IT equipment that they're having to take home? Has that had any impact on anybody? Insurance companies will be different.
It has, yeah. Yeah, it has had an impact. And I asked this question of the employee reference group recently, and feedback that I got was, yes, it has had an impact. Some people have had a £40 refund, believe it or not, because they're now at home and there's less burglaries, etc. So it was a bit of a surprise that. And same with car insurance. They've had refunds because there's a reduction in RTAs, road traffic accidents, etc. So it's been quite positive so far. I've not heard anything negative from staff with regard to that. But so yeah, we'll see where that you know, sort of over the next, I've not seen any increase in policy or anything like that, but I suppose that will be dependent on future claims, won't it, going forward, and it could change. So we're keeping an open mind on that one, Councillor Bellinger.
Well, that's good that it's actually had a positive side on it then, rather than a negative side for people. Yeah. That's great. And I think the other thing as well, what I wanted to raise is, I mean, we as members are starting, or we have had a lot of members of the public or constituents that are really not happy and becoming now probably aggressive, frustrated in, you know, having to deal with things. How are our staff coping with this as well? Because I should imagine, especially staff that are out there that are still dealing with people, still answering the phones to people as well, you know, are they sort of like, you know, receiving the harsh end of many of our constituents at the moment? And if so, have they got that support as well to deal with that?
This was a question that I asked at my management team only earlier this week with regard to have we had any increase in reporting on the violence and aggression or anything like that. Martin assures me that we haven't. You know, there's been some challenge. If anything, we've had quite a lot of positive feedback from members of the public thanking our staff for keeping things going, ensuring that resilience is there, supporting things like the household refuse when we had problems with absence, etc. So we've had a lot of positive response from the members of the public thanking our staff. We are recording any complaints, compliments, etc. So hopefully in the not too distant future we'll get a report, or you'll get a report on that through Scrutiny anyway. But I've got nothing negative that's come through from staff.
That's good. That's good to hear, is that actually? It really is. Okay, any more questions, members, before we move on to the next item? No? Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Craig. Really appreciate that. Great report, and that's been a really good discussion, really. A lot of questions asked and answered there. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on, we'll go back to now the item 5, which is the annual corporate performance report, and that is with Jez.
Tis, yes.
And Steph.
Yeah, myself. Can Scrutiny? You can hear me? Everything fine? Connection wise, yeah. Good, yeah. Okay. Apologies for the sort of earlier issues. So
not a problem.
Better late than never. So. Okay, so this is the 2019-20 corporate performance report, and we bring this obviously, you know, twice a year, the annual report in the summer, and then the half-yearly report in December. And as you know, we measure ourselves against the 20 northern boroughs with aspirations to be the best in the north against those northern boroughs. And for the annual year 19 and 20, we ranked 8th out of 20 northern boroughs. So just moving over onto page 2 of the report, it just sets out the context of how we measure performance and what we measure ourselves against. And it talks there in terms of it's been a challenging year for performance, and the ranking of 8th, you know, represents that it has, you know, performance hasn't been consistent across all areas. There have been some areas of good performance where we're top quartile, but there are other areas where obviously performance has dipped. And you know, I just want to be mindful to say this is 2019-20, so up until the 31st of March 20, so obviously just before the COVID period started. In terms of the 15 super KPIs that we measure against, 60% of those have improved or maintained performance. 75% have either met or near their targets for that year. Again, slightly less than last year, but it does represent that these are, we've set increasingly challenging targets throughout 1920. I think Scrutiny and Cabinet and members alike would, you know, there's very little value in just setting targets that aren't stretching in order for services to try and meet those. We also measure ourselves against the Vision 2024 indicators because, like I say, not everything can be measured in numerical terms. So Things like residents' perception, we have a residents' perception survey, and there's a full report on that, which is available to read in terms of all the indicators that will look within that. All this information is published on DataWorks, our performance and window on the world in terms of corporate performance at the council, and there are over nearly just short of 300 data sets that are available on there for members of the public alike to look at. So as I said, 1920, even before COVID, it was a challenging year. Budget challenges, Brexit planning, implementation, and increasing demand, say particularly around children's social care. So all of those, and then to throw in at the end of the year, the starting of the impact of COVID, which obviously we're going to see sort of wash through in 2020 and 21 corporate performance. But again, just to remind members, this is the year in summary for just before the COVID period. So there were some areas of key achievement, and I won't go into too much detail, just to talk around secondary education, and particularly around our attainment, and a high proportion of our schools are rated as good or outstanding. So and this is one area where we're almost top quartile. I think we are ranked second. So I'll just load that. The cultural scene, it talks there around the estimated tourist spend in Calderdale, 349 million in 2018. Again, those figures are going to be heavily impacted in 2020-21. But last year, 1920 was saw significant cultural attraction, which was then also replicated in terms of the resident perception, which came out strongly in terms of its cultural indicators and perception of arts and heritage. An area that was of interest in the previous year was the excess weight and obesity, particularly in reception age children and children who were at year 6. Pleasingly, in 1920, there's been a massive reversal of that, such that from we've got when measured against that particular indicator to now 4th. So, the effort and energy that's been put in by public health teams, children's social care teams, and CYP and others across the council has obviously borne fruit. There are, like I say, other areas where we do need to look to improve, and particularly around sort of the attainment at Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. And this is an area that, the service is well aware of. Children's social care, again, it will come as no surprise. The number of children on child protection plans, that it comes with, it attracts significant cost. But obviously it's a key area of the council because it affects some of our most vulnerable and some of our most in need of help young children, and to improve the outcomes and the life opportunities for those children. So it does obviously reference the fact that whilst there is a cost element to it, those budget action plans have been drawn up in conjunction with the service to help try and improve that performance. We also saw last year significant interest around highways and highways road condition, which then brought about the highways peer review, working with the LGA on the peer review. And like I said, today I was in a meeting, and some of that work is an action plan that was drawn up is beginning to bear fruit. And I think there'll probably be a further report that comes through to Scrutiny or other panels later this year around the progress on that highways peer review. And then finally, in 1920, even within forgetting aside COVID, we did see the employment rate in Calderdale at its lowest for a number of years, about 72%. This wasn't something that was reflected regionally or across all the northern boroughs. So as you can imagine, attracted a fair bit of interest and concern. Throwing into the mix, obviously, COVID and the obvious economic impact of that, which we're seeing daily. It is an area that the council is prioritising, and we will probably see close monitoring of that and the impact of work to address that as we go through 2020-21. And finally, as with any work, we have been constantly looking to refine the super key performance indicators. So things that were of interest and are still obviously of interest, such as carbon, the declaration of the climate emergency, building the economic resilience in towns and addressing inequalities. Those were all areas that were obviously highlighted during 2019 and 20, are still of interest, and more of interest, a priority, should I say, for the council, along with obviously the obvious mitigation of COVID and the impacts on our residents. So we are looking at and have been working with making sure that our sub-key performance indicators accurately reflect these priorities, and there have been changes throughout that, and we'll be reporting on those again in 2020-21. So I will pass the report over, and if I'm happy to take any further questions.
Okay, thank you, Jez. I'm guessing really with this, by the way, the noises are not my body, it's this chair that I've got, it's really quick. COVID-19, I should imagine, has been a serious spanner in the works with regards our corporate performance. And I should imagine it's probably set us back quite a number of months. How do you see us recovering from this? What are the figures looking like at the moment since March? And what are your thoughts on recovering from what's happened so far?
Okay, there is a separate piece of work that's been instigated to look at post-COVID recovery, and within that there is a work stream looking specifically at data and performance. So that work is still emerging. The exact numbers, I wouldn't want to quote anything specifically at the moment. That's not because I'm withholding any information. Just that there is a piece of work ongoing to look at, the impact, and we will obviously share that with the corporate leadership team and cabinet and scrutiny in due course, as and when that needs to be reported. Okay.
Councillor Scullion or Steph, either one of you want to come in on this?
Thank you, Chair. Can I chip in? There is something that Jez didn't make a great deal of, and I just wanted to draw the scrutiny committees, scrutiny panels attention to, which is something we had that the other 20 metropolitan boroughs did not have to the same extent during the period that we're reviewing, and that's flooding. We had, of course, you'll remember, the autumn general election, which kept us quite busy in many ways, and then we had Christmas and then the flood, and now straight into COVID. And to be honest, if there was a performance management indicator for how to be adaptive and responsive, I think Calderdale would be up there really, hit us and we come back resilient. I think the highlights that Jez has given, for me, one of the key things that I think I would really want to draw out is about the children in reception and coming into a school not being the level of obesity that was there in those children has reduced. Now that is really significant, actually. That makes a big difference to their life chances and their educational attainment in later years. We have actually got some further work to do, but I think that in itself, in terms of what you do as a council affects people's lives and their life chances. So that was one thing I wanted to mention. The other thing I wanted to mention was, of course, that in the run up to December, we spent quite a lot of time as a council looking at how the process of leaving the European Union was going to be. And we are, of course, dusting off all those plans and going round that again. And Jez gave, I think, a very nice answer to your question, Chair, in terms of what's this year going to look like. And the honest answer is we don't know. Our staff are working really hard, but these are difficult circumstances. And you know that particularly in educational attainment for children, many of them have actually missed quite a significant period of schooling. We have tried to really keep things going. People sometimes think that the council is doing nothing during COVID-19 period, the pandemic period, because they don't see the lights on in the buildings and so on. we have been able to carry on doing things like road mending. There's possibly been quite a lot of that during this period. But where we have got work, where workers can socially distance, and the government is keen to see that building work and so on carrying on, where there is planning behind the scenes, planning and permitting work on the highways network, we've carried on with that. So I think some of our indicators will show that. And my prediction is that other indicators that we, like other metropolitan councils, we measure ourselves against, it's not going to, I would predict, is not going to look as good next year. But as I say, if there was a performance indicator for adaptability and resilience, Calderdale would be up there.
We certainly would. I think some of the other things that, as well that have tested this year is is it Halifax Road, the road going into Brighouse, is it Elland Road? And the bridge in Elland as well. So there's things like that that have been thrown at us during these times that we've had to deal with, which have obviously taken some of the finances away from dealing with highways issues into major repairs as well. So, okay. Steph, well, you come in at this point.
The only thing I think I wanted to highlight was that because of COVID and the impact of that will be that some of these measures that we do tend to reflect on to judge our performance may not be available. So particularly a lot of the education measures where we would like to see improvement, those won't be coming through this year. So we may have a period of time where to really be judging ourselves, we won't be looking at the official statistics, but it will be based on the services relationships that they have with the schools, for example. So in terms of seeing quickly how well we bounce back from this, it won't be as simple as just looking at the numbers.
Okay. Right. Members, Councillor Lynn?
Yes, well, I'd like to echo Councillor Scullion's comments about A for resilience, because I think people have been amazing. And I think she's right to remind us of what 2019-20 actually meant for all the staff and all the council and the council's partners, and that I think that's absolutely right. There was just one, and I also wanted to say that some of the things that have changed, and I think probably particularly affect my ward, like the levels of childhood obesity and so on. I'm really pleased to begin to see some of that work beginning to turn around, and I suspect that some of it's got something to do with the work of the children's centres, which I know push this whole healthy eating thing. Yesterday I was talking to some young people involved in youth work in my ward in Himat and Unique Hub and so on, are doing amazing, who have been doing until lockdown, have been doing amazing things, getting people doing netball and all sorts of things. So I think there's a good story to tell there, and if we can somehow or other, once we are able to kind of resume encouraging people to participate in sports and so on, I'm sure we can keep that going. But there was one thing, and more people here probably know me as a glass half full person, but there is a bit of this glass that looking in this report that's half empty really, and that is that one of the points that's highlighted is that there's been a bit of an improvement in terms of resident perceptions in the numbers of people, the proportion of people who think that people of different backgrounds and communities get on well together in Calderdale. But what's happened, we've actually gone from fewer than half of the people in Calderdale thinking that that was the case to slightly over half thinking that that's the case. What that means is that in excess of 40-45% of people do not think that people of different communities, particularly in Calderdale, particularly get on well. And I think in view of some of the comments that have been going around and the blame game and so on, as far as what's happening in COVID-19 and so on is concerned, I just think we, all of us in a community leadership position, have really got a responsibility to try to make sure that we bring people together in Calderdale, and that we really set ourselves a target of saying, like, next year, let's see, despite everything that's been thrown at us as a borough with the COVID-19 thing and stuff, let's see if we can't push up that proportion of people that actually think people from different backgrounds get on well together, because I'd love to see that going up. Thank you.
You're absolutely right there, Council, and it's not just people from different ethnicities as well. It's people who live in the same street or across the street from each other we've found at the moment. So yeah, it's certainly something that we fully endorse, and that's bringing communities together. And I think we have a lot of work on our hands to do that over the months and years ahead of us after what we've actually gone through and people have had to put up with. So that's a very, very valid point, is that, Councillor Lynn? Councillor, I don't know if anybody wanted to come back to you, or is that just the point, really, Councillor Lynn? No, Councillor Robinson?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just 2 quick points, just quickly on the back of what Councillor Lynn has just suggested, and it's mainly directed at probably Councillor Scullion, really. It would be good if the council could initiate a campaign, something like open conversations or something, because it strikes me that sometimes people, when it comes to ethnic minorities, people can sometimes feel prohibited from asking questions when actually we should be asking questions, we should be learning. So it's not really directly related to this item. However, if the council could initiate a campaign to do with opening up dialogue, I think that would be a really interesting point. The second point for Jez and Steph, if we could include in the future maybe some progressive items around energy, that would be really interesting. So, for example, I know you could do something about if there's some metrics on the efficiency of council buildings, or the amount of electric vehicles in Calderdale, or charging points in Calderdale, the amount of energy procured from renewable sources. I think that would be a really interesting avenue to explore. And I think this is, in terms of priorities for the council, this is a really key priority for future progress, really harnessing electricity. So yeah, just over, if anyone wants to respond, a response isn't really required. However, if you do want to respond, it would be appreciated.
Yeah, and I think just adding to that as well, Councillor Robinson, and that's our carbon footprint. You know, we might think we're actually reducing it by having people working from home, but we're still creating that carbon footprint by people still working from home. So, you know, very good point. Councillor Scullion?
Thank you, Chair. I almost feel that Councillor Robinson was paid by me to plant that question, because we are actually working with the Democratic Society and part a similar organisation called Public Square to develop exactly the kind of Calderdale conversations, that more open conversations, really, I think we need, rather than our consultations, you know, do you want us to dig up this road or not? Having more open conversations, which I think do form the basis for better understanding. And actually, I was going to show off earlier on the chat, but restrain myself in terms of my very small amount of Bangla, showing that I could ask you how you were and tell you how I was and so on. So perhaps as members, we also have to think about how we relate to different groups within our communities. Just before Jess perhaps comes in, Chair, I just wanted to say that we do actually have energy reports, environmental and green reports, but we haven't married that up thus far with the performance report. But I think that in terms of our Climate Emergency Committee, they do have a raft of indicators, and we have reported on electric vehicles, on energy sources and so on. But I think we can probably marry those things up a bit better. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Jez, you want to come back in?
Yes, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to pick up on the point there. Yeah, from Councillor Robinson. We would welcome anything that, in terms of the development of the work plan, and conversations have been happening with myself and Lauren and Mike and others in Scrutiny support that that offer the opportunity to do a thematic piece like that, and we in the performance and business intelligence team can then add that performance element to it, that intelligence base, that evidence base. So, you know, whether it be, you know, obviously the carbon footprint and, you know, per capita CO2 emissions is one of the 15 super key performance indicators, and there are other ecological indicators that have been introduced in 2020, 21 around, you know, geological and wildfare. wildlife. Sorry. So that priority of the declaration of the climate emergency is still very much a priority. Is very much in our thinking. Is in the corporate leadership team's thinking and development of the performance framework for going forward for 2021. But individual and specific areas that we can support Scrutiny with around green or climate issues, then we would welcome that. And we've said that across all the Scrutiny panels as well. So I just want to reiterate that, really.
No, I appreciate that, Jason. No, you've definitely got our support. Not a problem. Okay. Any more questions? There's no one indicating. Okay, that's fine. Okay, thank you very much, Jess. Thank you very much, Steph. We'll now move on to our work programme. Councillor Scullion, would you mind, are you okay to stay for this, for our work programme? Because I think there are a couple of things that you brought up in Cabinet that you wanted our Scrutiny Board to look at. So if you don't mind. So yeah, anybody else, if you want to go now, that's fine. Thank you very much for coming along this evening. Really appreciate that. Really interesting items there on the agenda. So no, thank you very much. And please pass on our thanks as a board as well to all your members of staff. And if you could, Jackie, that'd be great.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay.
Cheers. Thank you.
Right. Work programme. Mike, are you going to join us, Mike? Mike, have you fallen asleep? Are you here?
No, I'm not falling asleep, Chair.
Shall I just do a bit of an update, Chair? Just on where we are, because I think we've sort of had a few updates since it was sent out to all members. So hopefully members will be aware that we've built in an additional meeting on the 3rd of September, and that's to cover a couple of finance items. So we're going to have the revenue monitor that went to Cabinet this week on that agenda, and then also the medium financial term strategy. And we've got a commercialisation update on there. So I'm in the process of updating that work programme, and we'll get that out to members and officers this week. We've also built in the item on the electoral system that members received a briefing note on. So we will have Lord Shutt of Greetland come in on the 9th of September for that. Most of the other items remain as they were from the last meeting. So all of those suggestions, they might have just been pushed on by 1 month. But as I say, we'll update it out to everyone.
Can I just interrupt? Did you mean the meeting's on the 9th of September, not the 3rd? You started off by saying an additional one on the 3rd.
We've got two Councillor Barnes. So we've got the 9th of September one scheduled, and we've got an additional one on the 3rd. So they are quite close together, but that's just to squeeze in the finance items that we want to do.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's fine. I think that's all I wanted to say, really. So yeah, happy to take any suggestions or amends as always.
Right, okay. Councillor Scullion, have we covered everything there that you wanted us to look at from Cabinet?
Yes, I think it's actually very important to take a look at the report which went basically the revenue and the report in particular in terms of the impact of COVID on the council's finances. And Nigel Broadbent, of course, will be coming with that. But it's such a dynamic situation in terms of understanding whether the government are going to make good on its promise to see councils right on their COVID spend. Clearly, it's complex and there's a lot to look at. And I would really appreciate the Scrutiny Committee's take on that and suggestions.
Okay. No, we'll certainly have a look at that. One of the things as well that I've asked for is again with regards to the commercialisation. So I've asked that Michael Holgate comes along to our next meeting. Which one was it? Was it on the 3rd or the 9th? Was it the 3rd?
Yeah.
Yeah, along with Nigel. And I think something, Rob, you mentioned, I think this the other day when we were discussing about our staff. We need to be listening to our staff more than ever now when it comes to making savings or being able to create revenue for the authority, especially considering the financial situation that we're currently in. So I don't know if you want to add to this, Rob, if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that I floated at a budget setting meeting 5-6 years ago. The best placed people within any organisation to identify where savings can be made, 9 times out of 10 are the people at the coalface. It's the people that are doing the job that can see areas where savings can be made. What we should be doing is encouraging those people to come forward with these savings suggestions by using the carrot rather than the stick, to use Deb's analogy earlier at the earlier briefing. And there should be some way, and I did suggest it, as I said, 5-6 years ago, and I was told that the unions wouldn't have it. There should be some way that we could financially reward members of staff who come forward with large savings and any savings suggestions for the council. You know, at the end of the day, quite often senior managers and directors do not see what's happening on the ground. You know, they can't do, they're too busy. You know, the best placed people are the people on the ground to put forward these savings, and we've got to start offering a mechanism where we listen to them. So I think it's something that as a council we've got to start looking at putting something in place and encouraging that process.
I agree. It's a shame we didn't ask Jackie just to stay for that little bit. Maybe could have added to that, but never mind. I'm sure we can get a note to her on that one. And I think someone's going to shoot me now for this. I mentioned this before, the story about KP and the peanuts, and a member of staff on the production line were measuring the bags of peanuts, and they took about 3 or 4 peanuts out, and it still sort of like weighed what it needed to weigh. So what they decided to do then was, you know, cut out just a couple of peanuts from each bag, and they actually saved themselves a fortune over time. It is actually a true story, funnily enough, but it relies on the people that know the job thoroughly inside out to say, hang on a minute, we can make that little saving here that could potentially save our company, our authority, X amount of pounds. So you're right, we do need to listen to those members of staff. So so anything else, members, that we think we should be looking at, really scrutinising at the moment? Because I think we do need to thoroughly be looking at stuff, and it's like I said, I mentioned before regarding the figures on the briefing on the temporary accommodation cost as well, which some of you have already mentioned earlier on too, that we had the figure of £433,530, which was the cost for the running of the gathering place for 6 months. Now, having sort of like scrutinised that, looked into that and ruffled a few feathers, that figure is more or less halved. So it's things like that really that we could potentially be looking at. So that saved, you know, nearly a couple of £100,000 by raising that issue. Where else are we spending money? Because, you know, we're trying to do the best for the people out there in Calderdale, which quite rightly so, but yet we're still not being cautious of the spend at the same time. So to me, we really do need to be looking at a lot of things, I think, at the moment. Rob?
Can I just ask? I don't know whether it was covered last year prior to me coming back on council, but the CAFM asset review, does that report back to here?
It does, yeah.
And when are we due the next report?
We've had meetings, haven't we, Mike, with CAFM, with Alan Lee and Stephen Hoyle.
We have some time ago.
Mike, can you tell me when the next report is due?
I don't think it's built in at the minute.
It's not built in, no.
Right.
I think Councillor Scullion's got a comment.
Yeah, Councillor Scullion.
Chair, I just wanted to remind members that Cabinet's report on Monday on office accommodation, the CAFM report, was in fact below the line, just in case somebody was tempted to move into discussion of that.
Okay.
But I do think we could do with getting the CAFM report back to scrutiny at some point, you know, in the near future, really.
No, it's worth putting that on.
Especially given the potential changes with regards to new ways of working, etc.
Yeah.
You know, it's something that we definitely need to be looking at as a panel.
Okay, it might end up being an exempt report depending on whether we're talking about you know, our officers. I know one of the things with CAFM, there was the asset review that was done, and then there was also the land review done as well, which are now, I think they've both been completed, so it's worth having a look at what we've got and what's put up for sale, I suppose, for disposal. I've nothing else to add. I think we've got quite a bit there, haven't we, Lauren? Councillor Dickinson's got a question. Councillor Regan.
Right, yes, thank you. Actually, it's a question for Councillor Scullion with regard to the exempt item for discussion on Monday evening. Was a decision taken? I was hoping to get to that meeting, but I couldn't make it.
I think
it's exempt.
I think we're still broadcasting live, aren't we, at the moment?
Yeah. I'm being deliberately obscure. Just wondering if any kind of decision on the exempt item was taken, or is it something that would be included in a CAFM report that would come back to us to have a look at? Because there were a couple of thoughts that I would have liked to have expressed, but wasn't able to.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Scullion. Yeah.
I would be, if Councillor Dickinson wants to put those, I was going to say on paper, on email to me, I'd be very happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you. I'll do that shortly afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair. Right. Other than that, I don't think there's anything else. I think we've got enough there, have we, Lauren? For the next meetings. Okay.
Yeah, more than enough.
Brilliant. Yeah, we have had enough. Right. Thank you, everybody. We're off to get spoons.
Thanks, Chair.
Stay for a pint.